Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. Our guest today is Ethan Seville. He's a clinical research professional who's worked across a wide variety of therapeutic indications and worked in all kinds of roles, including patient recruitment, clinical research coordination, quality assurance, management, and regulatory. Ethan is currently the Senior Director of Site Engagement for Slopeio, which is a really cool free tool for research sites. Helps manage your supplies and inventory, amongst other things, as you'll learn in this podcast. And in this episode, we discuss innovation at the site level, collaboration with larger institutions, and how Slopeio can help sites manage their supplies, documentation, and beyond. Without further ado, Ethan Seville. All right, Ethan, thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Brad.
Yeah, right on. We connected on LinkedIn. I'm always glad to talk to people who are, listening, and I'm also always looking for additional guests. So anyone who might be listening, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn like Ethan did. And again, I think everyone's sort of got something to share in the clinical research world. We all kind of have such different backgrounds. So I kind of want to start there. Can you tell me a little bit about, how you first got into clinical research?
Sure thing. Yeah, I feel like my experience is probably similar to most coordinators who started out, and that's by accidentally falling into the industry, not really knowing how big it was or how many people had that same experience. When I was in college, I had an internship with a doctor who had some research experience, but not a whole lot. But that was a little bit of a foot wet experience, dipping my toes into the field. But after I graduated with a bachelor's degree in biology, I wasn't really sure what I could do with that. It ended up taking about 9 months before I found an entry-level research coordinator position. It wasn't exactly what I was thinking I'd do when I was in school, but it ended up being a huge, huge open door into this incredibly complex, ever-changing, and quite nebulous industry of clinical research.
Yeah, it still surprises me to this day, like LinkedIn specifically, but like just the sheer number of people who work in the industry, it's insane. And then when you try to explain to people who aren't in the industry, they're like, "What are you talking about?" Like it's just so strange how diverse and sort of widespread the industry is. Again, I'm still blown away by it every day.
Right. Yeah. And you have people from all sorts of educational backgrounds. You have people from other industries that make their way in. It's really interesting. And I think that leads to a lot of the innovation you see at the higher levels of research, is because you do have a meeting of the minds of so many different backgrounds.
Yeah, that's true. And that's, I'm always sort of just tickled by how many people just accidentally fall into it. And again, I think that's the common way. I mean, there aren't, I know here in Oklahoma City, there is a clinical research program at one of our community colleges, but that's not super common. And again, I don't know that I've ever talked to anybody that's what they want to do. That's what they set out to be, out of high school.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, exactly. A clinical research coordinator.
I want to be a monitor.
Yeah, exactly. But, it still has so much appeal, sort of broad appeal, that it brings in people from all over the place. And so you specifically, something of interest to me is that you've recently sort of made the jump from a research coordinator to now you're more on the industry side with a vendor at this point. I guess that's what you'd call what you're doing now. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I guess so. We're somewhat of a solution, less a vendor, though. Those are all just nebulous terms anyway.
Yeah, that's very non-specific, but yeah,
right.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, so I've gotten to join the team over at Slopeio, which is super exciting for me because our primary focus and work is to support clinical research sites and make research work better.
Yeah, and so it's essentially, and you can absolutely correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure I won't get it quite right, but Slope is very much a solution for supply management. Would you say that's a fair way to say it?
Yep. And that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. So our main bread and butter is supply chain management, but that dovetails into sample management, into inventory and operations management. But the applications of what we do is help sites basically do any operation better, faster, with fewer errors and less duplication of effort.
So before we sort of drill down more into that, can you tell me about, especially for people interested that are listening, how did you sort of leverage your experience as a research coordinator to sort of jump over into the more, I guess, what you would call industry side?
Yeah, and this is one of the coolest experiences that I've gotten to have because I worked kind of in every seat in a clinical research office. I started as a coordinator, did a lot with recruitment, did a lot of actual study visits myself over about 7 years in the industry. I worked as a site manager. I helped in a regulatory department. I got to even do things like assisting in infusion trials for rare diseases. I really got to get a piece of each part of the pie of the clinical research world. But I had looked for solutions for our site, a way of doing things better and faster when I was actually in the research manager position. And we had looked into a few different industry-related tools. A lot of them are expensive and really cost prohibitive for sites. Profit margins are always really low, razor thin in a lot of sites. And so it's hard to justify jumping into a new solution that might cut out your entire margin when you're already operating pretty well. But I actually came across Slope at an ACRP conference, and I had them in the back of my mind. So when we were looking for solutions, we looked back into Slope and realized, well, this is great because, for one, it was a free resource for sites to use. So I was actually a Slope user for about a year and change before I came onto the team. So I got to use Slope as a coordinator and site manager.
Yeah, so that's awesome. I like two aspects of that story. One is, a company like Slope bringing in people who actually have legitimate real world site level experience, which I think is astonishingly, rare for a lot of the industry side. I've dealt with people who are they're starting site networks and they've never worked at a research site. They have no idea what they're doing. Now, that's not to say that, they can't still be successful, but I think that you are a lot more familiar with the pain points of a clinical research site than someone with no experience. So, there's like you said, that a lot of sites run off of very, very small margins. They don't want to spend money. They don't like taking sales calls. They don't like dealing with a lot of those things. So that's awesome. I love that. And I also love that you kind of networked your way into the position you're in, it sounds like, which I still think that really going out there and networking is sort of a really dangerously underutilized thing in the clinical research field. Not in a lot of other industries, but specifically in clinical research, we tend to be very siloed off, sort of, I don't know if it's the competitive nature or what it is, but we don't always share a lot. And as a result, we don't always network and connect a lot. So I like those two aspects of your, sort of journey there.
Right.
So Slope is free, and you did mention that, but tell me a little bit more about what you guys do. I admit I have checked out Slope, although it's been some time. So tell us a little more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Slope offers operation management and clinical trial supply chain management tools 100% free for sites. That's really, really cool. Like we mentioned before, sites are often resource strapped. So adding a tool in their toolbox is always going to be a good thing. But we've tried to do that intelligently. So we offer a web platform. It's a web-based platform that requires very little learning curve to get into. Anyone on the team can benefit from it. It's not just for one power user or one super techie young coordinator who's going to run the whole thing. It's been designed so that every single coordinator can use it and benefit from it. The base, easiest way of describing it would be to give a case study of a new protocol that you have starting at your site. You want to keep track of where all your lab kits are. You can load an inventory onto the platform, onto our website, track each one of those lab kits with their serial number, lot number, expiration date. Whenever you go to use one of those lab kits, it's as simple as clicking a button that marks that lab kit is used, updates your inventory. Our platform will give you automatic expiration alerts, automatic low inventory alerts. You can load information into our platform as to how to reorder samples, or reorder lab kits, reorder maybe other bulk ancillary supplies. Basically anything that you want, you can load it into our platform and track. It's completely up to the end user how they want to use it. But what's really neat is that it's a sandbox and you can play with it and make it work for whatever you want. For instance, when I was a coordinator, when I used the platform, I used it to track certifications and recalibrations of other equipment, and not necessarily protocol specific. We had, refrigerated centrifuges or infusion pumps that were all on different calibration schedules. By loading it into the platform, the Slope platform, I would get automatic expiration alerts or recalibration alerts. And I had added notes for myself of which vendor we used to recalibrate this. So it saved me all sorts of time and organization just by entering in that same information I had put in an Excel sheet before. Now I was getting an automatic email alert when I needed to go recalibrate that device.
Yeah, so I love that, especially right now when, you may have a study that's been on hold or suspended for, 2 months. And when you come back, you may not realize that lab kits have expired,
right,
or, the calibrations are due for your centrifuge, et cetera. So I really like that, especially, I operate a site network, so I'm not at every site all the time. I can't know or just go look at, my lab kits or all the other equipment that's on site. So sort of have that in a decentralized, to be able to access it when you're not there is a huge benefit for sure. Again, I think now is a great time because, again, studies are being put on paused or put on hold. So that stuff may sit for who knows how long at this point.
Exactly. Well, and another interesting application of the platform that wasn't necessarily in the plans from the beginning, but it's been proven to be so useful now, is that it helps sites prepare for visits even when they can't be on site physically. If a coordinator is working as part of a skeleton crew with rotating schedules that has to prepare for a visit, they'll know, okay, I've got this subject coming in for visit 12 and they're on this schedule, so they need kit B. I can tell the one nurse that's going to be on site exactly where to go to pull that kit. I can update that inventory remotely, and I can tell them, hey, while you're on site, we need to order X, Y, and Z, or I can even order that from home because I know exactly what we have and what we don't have. All of those extra tools that we never would have thought were needed 6 months ago are incredibly valuable to sites now. We were speaking to one of our sloped sites back last month that runs an oncology unit, and they've been using Slope more than ever exactly for that reason, so that they can plan and schedule who needs to be on site, what resources they already have, and reduce the number of people that are in the clinic so that they're not putting their patients at any additional risk of exposure because they can't stop their treatments. They still need to make sure that their trials keep running, but they still want to make sure that they're reducing the number of staff on site to only what's necessary. And Slope is a key part of them doing that.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And if I recall, in my sort of limited use of it, I mean, you can set an alert for pretty much any amount of time to know when things are running low. So, if I order a lab kit today, I may not see it for, 4 to 6 weeks,
right?
Depending on who your vendor is. So you can have it alert out several months in advance so that you can really stay on top of your supplies.
And another interesting feature that's there for free is that you can actually set expected timelines for when you receive lab kits, and it'll alert you if you haven't added anything to that inventory in that time frame. It'll say, hey, didn't you order these lab kits? Have you gotten them? Do you want to load them? Do you need to contact your vendor about them? All of those just nice, easy, unintrusive reminders really help sites keep a good hold on it without getting overwhelmed with information.
Yeah, no, that is good to know too, because it's even we work with 5 different lab vendors, so you don't know. Some of them come very quickly, some of them take forever to come. sometimes tracking down that information can be a pain. So if you've got that sort of baked into the system, it's just one less touch point you've got to make somewhere along the line.
Exactly.
I love that. I didn't really consider you could track city training and I don't know, even like when your CVs come up.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's super cool. You can track whatever you want. It's one of those things that's kind of like an off-label application, but definitely approved by Slope to do is
Sure.
track things like, any certification. I had a whole quote unquote inventory of certifications and CVs for our site where we would track, oh, this person's IATA training is about to run up, but we use this vendor. We use Safety Pack to do our IATA training. And we would even include our test codes in those notes to make sure that we had the least amount of effort we needed to keep up with our research and all of those things, all within the platform.
Yeah, no, that's awesome too. If there's a place to keep, all those notes and sort of centralize as much of that information as possible, because, the bigger you get, just the more complex it becomes to manage all of those things as your staff increases or as your number of studies continue to go up, hopefully.
Right.
It becomes more and more difficult to keep up with all those things. So, and that's sort of a thing that I've always kind of just taken for granted, and have been, relatively lucky that there's been a few times that I've gone to pull a lab kit and you're like, well, crap, they're expired. They expired at the end of last month now. I have to bring the patient back in for a lab kit, or back in for a lab draw rather. So yeah, I love that. That's a ton of value that I think, again, is sort of underappreciated probably for most sites.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I've worked in a number of different indications and, very simple labs and very complex labs. But the principle is it applies to every site, no matter the size. If you can take something off the coordinator's plate, take something out of their mind, and put that on us, help us manage that for you, we can make you a more efficient coordinator just in removing work from your plate.
Yeah, and it's a free resource. I mean, it's not, you really don't have a lot to lose by trying it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it doesn't matter how big or small you are. Those are things that you have to keep up with and have to track. So the less you have to worry about it, the better off you're going to be.
Exactly. And really, it's a best practice to start now. We've really wanted to encourage our sites to adopt SOPs or draft their own SOPs and how they manage their inventory, not even just using Slope as an SOP. But what we've found is that sites with those robust SOPs represent themselves better to sponsors and have more actual data to show their sponsors. They can demonstrate with data from our platform that they waste less lab kits than most sites. They're incredibly efficient with what they reorder and how they consume pretty expensive supplies. But they also demonstrate that they're just on top of their game. They have taken an extra step to compose themselves as a site and put that effort in the beginning, which makes them more valuable to sponsors doing site selection.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And as a coordinator, I can't tell you how terrible it is to have to break down 25 lab kits at a time. That's super tedious and frustrating and annoying. So if anything that helps curb...
You run out of trash cans in your building.
Yeah, you filled up
they're full of all those thermal shippers.
Filled up a Sharps container with glass tubes that you have to throw out. So yeah, that's
right.
That's another little undervalued thing there. I like that. So I'll tell you what, aside from use of Slope, what's a best practice you'd share with other sites from your site level days?
There are a number of best practices that I wish would be more common. So high level, the worst attitude that a site can adopt is that of the comfortable mess. And it's something that I've seen almost endemic to clinical research sites. And it's not necessarily any coordinator or site manager or even a PI's fault. It's just the nature of the industry. Sites have so many things thrown at them from different sponsors. They have different vendors they have to use. They have all the different pharmacies, IVRSs they have to use. Even electronically, there's a bit of a comfortable mess going on. And coordinators really have amazing skills in keeping track of all the things that they're forced to juggle. But that mess might have worked for a while, and it might still work for a while, but that doesn't mean it's the best way of doing it. So there's this hesitance to innovate. Maybe it's because a lot of coordinators or managers feel like they don't have the time to innovate. Maybe it's because they feel like it's risky to go outside that box. But resistance to that innovation is probably the one thing that's holding most sites back from growth. I think most sites, when they start, have a period of rapid growth where they're constantly adding new studies, they're adding new coordinators, they grow and grow until they hit somewhat of a carrying capacity, where their rate of new trials and ending trials kind of hits somewhat of a dynamic equilibrium. And when it gets to that stage, sites no longer really innovate. They rarely adopt new practices. They fall back on old SOPs. They fall back on old habits that mostly work. But what I've seen is that sites that are constantly looking at ways to innovate, maybe having a policy that says we review our SOPs once a year, but a different person does an internal audit of our SOPs and finds ways where we can innovate. Or maybe doing internal QA processes that have a thoughtful analysis behind them that look for patterns and trends that they can change and do things better. Maybe it's adopting a policy that says, hey, sponsors, when you come to us and say we need to do X, Y, and Z, we'll tell you this is how we do it at our site. Here's our SOP that we've developed for it. Empower the sites to really do what they do best and not necessarily just do what sponsors and CROs make them do. So while a best practice may be a more general statement, but basically I would say that a site really needs to have that attitude of innovation.
I like the way that you sort of broadly phrased that. I think you're right. I think that's sort of an endemic quality that's taken over the research world. And I think it's, probably a result of a few things. So it's like you mentioned that, I've got 75 logins to different systems, to keep up with. That's insane. So you are sort of you spend a lot of time just kind of keeping the balls in the air, which does make it difficult to keep a broader perspective so that you can innovate, or you can, be reactive to what's going on.
Right.
And I really feel like the more institutionalized that a research site becomes, then the less likely you are to deviate from the status quo, and I see that on some studies I'm working on, talking to other sites. We're very different. We're independent, and we're sort of, installed within these different clinics. But you talk to these larger academic sites, and a lot of them just don't, they're not incentivized to do anything differently. And they are at the mercy of the larger institution that they're a part of. So they're really just, they're not empowered to be able to do that.
Right.
As just sort of a low-level employee, where research is probably the least revenue-driving thing that place does. So they're sort of an afterthought. So they're just kind of stuck with whatever they can get, which is oftentimes very little.
Exactly. With big institutionalized sites like that, you have a lot of clout, you have a lot of name recognition, you have a ton of resources. But there's, with every extra person that's there, there's more bloat and more red tape and more IRB personnel to get through,
right,
and more schedules to get on, more budgeting departments to talk to. There was a great example of the double-edged sword that big site carries with some really critical pediatric neurology trials that were coming through in the last couple of years. It took one large institution almost 2 years to activate a study in a very critical need population, local to where I am. And by the time that they were active, enrollment had closed. So all the patients that were, literally dying to get into this trial,
right,
that could be life-changing for them, then had nothing. An independent site might be able to get up and running much, much quicker. In a period of a month, they can go through central IRB, they can get their budget done, they can do everything. But they're often reduced or limited to just their limited manpower because they can't bear the burden of having extra staff or extra resources that go unused. But if you have a new study that needs to start right away, can you really spend the time to go out and hire a new coordinator and onboard them and train them and get them up to speed? There's definitely an imbalance there between your small independent site and your large academic institution.
Yeah, for sure. And you would think that may drive collaboration in the future, but in my experience, at least, it's just not the case. I've tried to collaborate with large institutions, and it very rarely works. Yeah, I just feel like the higher you go within those institutions, the less well understood it is. The problems that you just described. I mean, it's very frustrating to see when you're right. There's that imbalance. So, I mean, most research sites are risk averse to begin with. So asking them to hire more staff to, do a trial right is just often it's not on the table.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hope, we can make strides towards, fixing that. Maybe more collaboration is the answer. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but that's certainly one of the major problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some resources you use now or when you were a coordinator? What are some things you'd share with sort of the clinical research community that make your job or made your job easier?
I think one of the most unserved resources are local chapters of clinical research organizations. Based here in Atlanta, there aren't too many super active ones. For a while, actually, even the ACRP chapter was inactive here in Atlanta. But thankfully, we did have an ACRP conference in Atlanta back towards the beginning of my career. So I got to go to some of these bigger networking events and really opened my eyes to how big the world of clinical research was. But I would encourage every coordinator that's out there to find a local clinical research chapter, whether that's ACRP, SOCRA, any of them out there. Because I guarantee you, there are other coordinators like you in your situation who are looking to improve the way they do things, just talk to each other. Like you mentioned before, collaborate. There is a competitive nature to clinical research. I mean, we're all used to, competitive enrollments where if we don't get our patients enrolled, then the study's going to close and we lose out on revenue. So that means our neighboring site that is in the same trial, we can't have that great of a relationship, right? But that's not really the case. Everyone I've worked with in the industry, while there might be that air of competitiveness, really is all on the same page. And that's just that we want to get medications to market. Every coordinator and every investigator that I've met is genuinely doing research for good reasons and would like to collaborate. And I think it's an underserved resource, especially for new coordinators that need to be exposed not just to the indication that they're working in or the practice that they're working in, but other sites that have maybe more developed SOPs or just different ways of doing things. Not that one is better than the other, but that exchange of knowledge really needs to take place if we're going to grow as an industry.
Yeah, no, I think, again, that's a great point. There's a SOCRA chapter where I live at the university, and I know that early on in my career, it was sort of enlightening to attend. It was, it's a little bit of a homogenous group because it's pretty much just people within the university. But even then, for everyone you talk to, there's a different way of doing something. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I don't know if the lack of consistency is good or bad, but I mean, the point is there's something for you to learn, just by having those conversations. And I do agree that I think the competitive nature of what we do is sort of overinflated. Like I've had studies with, there's a site, down the street, and there's enough to go around, especially if you do good quality work, you won't necessarily lack opportunities.
Exactly.
So that's, again, something I hope, goes away a little bit with time. And in large part, both of those are reasons why I started doing this. So, we can all share our best practices and things we've picked up along the way and sort of break down the idea that there's, we should be siloed and we should be competitive with each other versus, just being more open, transparent, and collaborative.
Absolutely.
So I love that. All right. Anything else you want to share before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I've really gotten to know a lot just the last few months here, working with Slope and engaging with sites all over the country and around the world now, which is super cool. And if I had to sum up some of that experience, it would really just be that research is already hard enough as it is. We're dealing now with a pandemic that is changing the industry. Probably like most industries in the world, I'm not necessarily going to make some grandiose claims that clinical research singularly has been affected, but in some very specific ways, this has been a genuine paradigm shift. The sites that we will go back to when all of this is over, if all of this is over at any point, will look entirely different than what they did in February of 2020. We're in the cocoon stage now. We were maybe slow and kind of bloated caterpillars before, with lots of inefficient processes and lots of baggage that sponsors and CROs and years of working in a bloated industry led us to carry. And now we're kind of, broken down into a somewhat nebulous goo of who we're going to be when we come out on the other side. But this is a great opportunity. Even though this is a really challenging time for a lot of people personally and professionally, it's a wonderful opportunity to take a changing industry and make it better. So if you're a coordinator right now, if you are a site manager, now is the time to be looking at solutions, looking at your SOPs, reevaluating the way you manage your teams. Do you really need 20 people on site every single day when only 4 are seeing patients? Can you free up your coordinators to be doing more search work, better recruiting, more thoughtful recruiting, better community outreach to improve the reputation of clinical research in your local community? You get questions on every single IRB application that says, how is clinical research viewed in your community? Have you done anything to change that yourself? Why not? It's something that you could do to engage with the people that you are helping. And this is the time to do it. So when we come out of this at some point, due to the hard work that clinical researchers are doing right now, we want to be in a better place than we were just a few months ago.
Inspiring words. Ethan, I love it. Where can people find you online?
So you can find us at slope.io. That's slope, like a ski slope.io. 100% free. Not just do you get the platform, but you also get our dedicated site engagement team that are always there to help you, even if it's something as little as loading an inventory into our platform or giving you guys free onboarding and free training. In addition, we just want to be a resource for sites, no matter where they are, what indication they work with. All of that can be found just at our website, slope.io, or you can find me on LinkedIn, as well as the rest of our team.
Awesome. Ethan, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Brad.
As always, thank you for listening to the Note to File podcast. Please check us out at notetofilepodcast.com for full episode transcripts, show notes, and contact information for our guests. Thanks again.